Chancey, here we are again, my friend.
Hey, Brad. How are you, sir? Good to be back here on the man right before Christmas. It's good cold mornings the last couple mornings, and so
Man, it has been fantastic weather. Since we talked to you last, we've probably got 5 inches of rain, turns out, in our area out in the big city of Arrowton, Morrock.
oh man,
Yeah,
yeah,
enough to make the creek come out.
whew, much needed rain. I saw the river came up quite a bit as well, so there was lots of water that got dropped north.
Yes, it did. It probably pushed all the wildlife out of those bottoms, that was for sure.
Yeah, make them find a high spot for sure.
Hey, speaking of having to find a spot, today we're going to talk about habitat.
Habitat, yeah, it's absolutely concerning deer. Management of habitat is the foundation of successful deer production. I mean, it is the backbone of everything. Habitat management. There's basically, when you're talking about whitetail deer, three most important things are habitat, habitat, and habitat.
Absolutely, yes, and that's quite different today than what it was back before man got in this area. The habitat has changed quite a bit due to fire suppression,
Yeah, fire suppression,
due to
overgrazing or undergrazing. I mean, our ecosystems, the post oak savanna here in the Blackland prairies, they were formed by three major forces. And those forces were grazing by large herbivores such as bison, and elk, and pronghorn antelope, and even white-tailed deer to some extent. Then also by fires, wildfires. The Indians would set some of them, bring in lush grass to make animals come back later, and then plus just natural wildfires. And then the third one was drought. And so those three forces shaped the ecosystem that we call the Blackland prairie and the post oak savanna. And the removal of those forces is an unnatural disturbance, and it changes plant composition and plant communities.
well, good Lord, Chancey, look at what it's done in places like California where they've taken one of those factors out as far as like grazing or controlled burning or that
Oh
kind of thing.
yeah, they get the fuel source gets so bad, so absolutely bad that the underbrush catches, and then you get a canopy fire, and then once you get a canopy fire and those Santa Ana winds and a low humidity, it gets bracing. You burn the whole forest down, and there ain't no stopping it until Mother Nature decides to put it out.
Absolutely, yes. It's kind of the way it's designed, where all these parts of this system are designed to work together. And when they don't,
Yes.
we have disasters.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand as we as human beings, we don't like fire, we don't like smoke. Fires are dangerous; they can burn your house down, but they're absolutely necessary in ecosystems.
Well, Smokey the Bear said they were.
Yes, well, yeah, I remember. I gotta say this because it's actually a unique story. When I was taking fire ecology when I was in graduate school, Dr. Backus, who was my major favorite professor up there. I ended up going to graduate school mainly because I wanted to take every class that man taught because he was just absolutely brilliant. But in fire ecology class, I remember we were talking. This was in 2004, so just do the math there. 2004, we were talking about the forest ecosystems in California and everything, and then also applying it to the Blackland prairies and even to some of our areas here that are wooded and forested areas. And I remember him talking about the fuel source in Bastrop, Texas, and he said in 2004 or five, it might have been 2005. This is before 2006. He said Bastrop, Texas, is a ticking time bomb. It's not if, it's when. So
And what year was this?
that was in 2005, and look at what happened in 2011.
Oh my goodness,
That's
that was a terrible drought.
Yeah,
We had a terrible drought that year.
yeah.
Dried everything out, and then of course wildfires followed, didn't they?
Yes, and then that was I mean, it got a canopy fire over there, and it burned the whole forest down. Because there was a fuel source that had been built up and built up and built up, for so long. But now, the Texas Forest Service and Parks and Wildlife, they're managing that area very well now, putting back. They're using prescribed fires, they're starting to get quail back in that area, around Bastrop too. I was planting native grass last winter. I was talking to the biologist out there, and he's like, man, we're getting quail back here. The savannas, it's getting a savanna, little blue stem savanna underneath these pine trees. They're burning regularly. They still have some cultural issues about burning that they have to deal with being in town. But, they look at it now, this place is going to burn one way or the other.
Yes.
They're going to burn it and manage it, and control burn, or it's going to burn one day like it did in 2011. So, that's where the system comes in, and where we are as human beings, managers, to strike that balance that we keep talking about between the needs of wildlife and the needs of people.
Absolutely. That kind of goes into saying that those types of things are what create this ideal habitat. Of course, now everything has changed in the world a little bit now from what it was back before so many people were here, but there's still the same four limiting factors
Regarding habitat,
regarding
yeah,
habitat now that there was all along?
all along. So we're talking about habitat for any animal, any wildlife species. We're focusing on deer, so we're just going to kind of use them to tweak. There's basically the needs are relative and site specific. Deer thrive in many different habitat types, but there's fundamental requirements that are called limiting factors. And these limiting factors, the four big ones or main ones, are food, cover, water, and space. Those four limiting factors, and the reason they call them limiting factors is because a limiting factor, consider it would be something like it's a weak link. It's that critical to survival of an animal or species. An example of a limiting factor would be severe drought or habitat destruction. But the main ones that every wildlife species needs is food, cover, water, and space.
I'll never forget in an animal nutrition class that I took at A&M. Well, it's been 20 something years ago now, Chancey, I guess, close to it. I'll never forget them talking about proteins in livestock and cattle and that type of thing. As far as like whenever you go to, and we'll get more into this later on another episode when we talk more about like supplemental feeding. And if you're a bodybuilder or if you're trying to put on muscle or something like that, protein's important.
Oh, absolutely.
And proteins, of course, are made up of essential amino acids. And in cattle, I think there's 16. You got like methionine, you got lysine, you got tryptophan, which is the one that makes you sleepy out of turkey, I believe. Turkey and that is high in tryptophan, and that's the amino acid that if you get too much of it on Thanksgiving, it makes you sleepy. But so the quality of a protein is only as good as its most limiting amino acid. So you have these 16 essential amino acids, and the reason I tell this story is because I'll never forget that professor saying to picture it like one of those pegboard whiskey barrels. Those pegboard whiskey barrels are only going to float until it reaches its shortest peg, and then water's going to start to spill in. Well, amino acids are similar in that way, that the quality of a protein is only as good as the most limiting amino acid. So lysine is typically your limiting amino acid. So the more balanced you get your amino acids, the more balanced the more better the protein, the less water gets in your barrel. Well, these limiting factors that we're talking about today are the same thing. If you don't have enough of one of them, that's going to limit you. It don't matter if you got infinite amount of water, but you've got very little food. You're only going to have as many deer in your habitat as there is food. It don't matter if you have as much water and cover as you need.
Yeah, I mean, because that's what when we start talking about that carrying capacity. You can have as much cover, but if you don't have a food source to match it, you're only going to be able to grow or raise, so many deer or have so many deer on your property. One of those is going to limit it. There's not enough water. There's not going to be the amount of animals that could potentially be there if those limiting factors were available and in good, what I would say, interspersed throughout the habitat. So not only is habitat has components of all those, the mixing of those components is very, very important.
I don't even believe we mentioned yet what these four limiting factors are.
Food, cover, water, and space.
Okay. So our goal here is in our deer habitat to have as well of a balanced ratio, I guess, of these four things.
Yes. And, so let's just start with food and go into a little bit about food, because just like us, deer have to eat,
And what is a deer, Chancey? A deer is a
ruminant.
A ruminant.
Yeah. So that has a lot to do with what they select to eat.
It does, because here's what a ruminant is for those of you who don't know. Cows are ruminants, sheep, goats,
exotic deer.
Yeah. So it's what these ruminants are. They have a 4-compartment stomach compared to a monogastric, like we are. So they have this special digestive tract that allows them to take advantage of things that some species can't. And so that being said, that does not mean that deer and cattle are the same by any means, because food passes through a deer rather rapidly.
Yes. I mean, when you look at the whole list of ruminants that we're familiar with, cat from the top, say cattle, sheep, goats, exotics, and then white-tailed deer. Out of all those animals, the white-tailed deer has the smallest, what they call like rumen capacity to weight ratio, and they also have the fastest passage time. I've read and been told it's anywhere from 6 to 8 hours. I've also heard 8 to 10, and I saw one study, it wasn't a lot, that 16 hours. But let's just say, it's around 8 hours to 10 hours. From the time what you put in your mouth, it's coming out the other end. And that's why deer are called concentrate selectors. They walk from plant to plant and pick the very best part of woody species. So that's when we're talking about food. We can break basically that food down into four broad categories, kind of like food, cover, water, and space. Well, with food, we've got one category is forbs. And what we consider forbs is broadleaf, herbaceous, annual, perennial plants. What we normally call these weeds or wildflowers.
Yes, and that's what we spray every spring in the pastures.
That is what we spray every spring in the pastures. But be honest with you, that is the white-tailed deer's preferred choice of food. If it was at Luby's cafeteria and it could pick anything that it wanted, it would pick forbs every time. They constitute 25 to 50% of a deer's diet when they're abundant. That's what the deer, and the reason is because they're high in nutrition, they're highly palatable, there's not a whole lot of cellulose in them, there's not like grass, not a lot of cellulose on them, and it passes through the deer. They're usually high in protein, very nutritious, and they pass through a deer relatively easily, and they get a lot from them.
And so what are some examples of this?
Forbs?
Yes.
Any of your legumes out there, not like your woody legumes, but your wildflowers and your weeds. Things, think of all your wildflowers, your vetches that come up there, clovers, any of that kind of stuff is what we would consider forbs.
And so in plants, you have two different types of plants.
Yes.
You have a broadleaf, you have a grassy plant.
Yeah.
Yes, and these are the things that usually have like a broadleaf, round in shape, or it's just doesn't look like a grass, basically.
And grasses is one of the types of food that we're going to cover. Forbs is one, but since we're talking about, we'll go right to grass. For lack of a better definition, grasses are narrow-leaved herbaceous plants with parallel veins.
Now, when Chancey mentions grasses for deer, he's not talking about coastal Bermuda or any type of Bermuda for that reason.
Yeah, in my opinion, grasses are particularly native grass, they're most important for deer as a source of cover for fawning. But deer will utilize grass as a food source, but it's a very, very small amount of food. Like only less than 10% of their total diet is in grasses. And it's most normally always the very, very young shoots of grasses when it first starts growing, or right after you burn it, it starts greening up.
Well, there you go with burning again.
Yeah. Right. It makes, that's part of a lot of data suggests that the Indians intentionally burned areas to get hunting grounds so that the bison would come back in it because it was so lush. They would migrate back in because of that. And there's a lot of data, especially in the Midwest, that suggests the Indians would do that.
Almost like a bison food plot.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. Bison everything food plot. It tracks it.
Because if you burn, you start to get a lot of these forbs too.
Yes, and all that flush and all those forbs, or they bring in the arachnids like the little spiders and the beetles and the insects, the little young stuff, and that's what the turkey poults are eating. And that's what the baby quail are eating because they got to have protein. They're little bitty. They're growing. They're not eating much seeds. They're mostly eating protein, which is your spiders and stuff like that.
Yes.
So grasses, like I said, deer can utilize them. In the wintertime right now, you'll see deer out in the middle of a coastal field, and it's dried, and, we've had our first hard freeze. They're not out there eating the Bermuda grass. They're eating all the little tiny chickweeds and the little stellarias. And
little hen bits.
And stuff that's coming up, right? All the little cool season stuff that's coming up, they're out there hustling those. That's what they're after. So
that's why they don't stay in one spot too long.
No, deer, that's, they truly are an amazing critter to watch feed in the wild. Like, not just eating corn, but if you've ever watched a deer in the wild go from plant to plant and eat stuff, it's just amazing. There was a deer that I knew in South Texas, we called him Stickerbird, but we were watching him one year. He was going eating a prickly pear cactus, and then he would walk and pass up 5 or 6 prickly pear cactuses and go to another pear and just start eating it. And I'm thinking, what is wrong with the other 6 that you just passed up? But there's something
they know.
They know what they need, and they know what amount they need. And it's just amazing to watch one eat. It's kind of like a cow. If you've ever put a cow on a brand new native pasture, it's got seed heads, and they are like a fine-tuned computer software program going through there. They're grabbing tops, they're grabbing bottoms of different species, and just nonstop, all in one motion. It's amazing to watch one graze like a diverse native prairie.
Yes, it really is. Like you said, if you turn them out into a field of something that's very well established, and you come back the next day, you'll see what the cows like and what they don't like. They'll have all the fresh tender stuff eaten off. The real stemmy stuff will be left.
Yeah, they kind of know, like, well, I need a little more protein here. I ate the top of this seed head, or this flower. I'll get me some carbs down here, or so, I'll eat lower on this plant. they're amazing to watch. They'll pick and choose.
It's too bad we don't have that sense because we'd probably be in better shape.
Yes, yes, it would be. We may have back in the day.
Maybe
Back
so.
in the day when Uncle Basil DeVaca was talking about people running down there, they was in pretty good shape.
They were in good shape back then. I don't think they could eat a cheeseburger from some restaurant and then go chase down a deer.
No, they couldn't.
That has changed quite a bit, which we talked about in one of our earlier episodes for sure. But that brings us to browse.
Yeah, browse. So woody browse, that's another component or broad category of deer food, and that's the leaves and twigs from trees or shrubs from woody species, and it comprises about 30 to 50% of their diet. It is
that much, yes, 30 to 50%
throughout the year. But it's very, very important. Number one, these woody plants, the browse, are important from a cover standpoint, which we'll get to, but they're also very important as a food standpoint. Because I want to mention forbs with browse right quick. But before we do that, I want to go to one last category, and that's mast. It's a food source. And mast, all that is the fruits and nuts of trees and shrubs. Examples are acorns, pear, tunas, persimmon fruit, hickory nuts, acorns, you name it.
And that if you go to talking about that food group right there, we don't have a lot of that in the Blackland Prairie.
No, we don't. We really don't. I mean, we've got a lot of hackberry trees out there in places, but they're small mast, and I don't know if, I'm sure deer will utilize it if they get down there because I know they'll browse their leaves, but a lot of coons and squirrels will get, a lot of hackberries and birds before deer would use it.
Will deer eat pecans?
I'm sure that they would, yeah. I've never sat there and just watched one camp under a pecan tree, but I don't see why I would. I mean, they'd have to fight through a shell, but I've seen them eat turnips and, crunching them. Would not surprise me, especially if they're broken or something or had broken some form.
Yeah, I mean, an acorn, same way, if you could eat an acorn, I guess you could eat a pecan, maybe.
I don't know. I've never watched a deer eat a pecan. I'll be honest with you. That's a great question that I don't have the answer to. It wouldn't surprise me. Deer, they're an amazing critter as far as what they know, how to, get stuff and break stuff apart, and find the good stuff to it. So it wouldn't surprise me if they do.
So they're going to pick a browse first.
Well, no. In the categories of those four categories, forbs, browse, grass, and mast, if they had their choice, they want forbs first. But what's the problem with forbs?
Not very many of them.
Well, in wet years, we got plenty of them. They're everywhere, in the spring and summer. But how many of them are in the winter?
That's true.
I mean, they're really,
and they're not growing very fast.
They're not growing. I mean, a lot of our little forbs are what we call wildflowers. They come up in the fall, right?
They do.
October, November, and germinate. But they just sit there as a little rosette, winter long, and then come springtime, they sprout and put wildflowers. But the main problem with the forbs, which is what their preferred food is drought. They're not dependable. They're not there every single year. So we as deer managers kind of, and also people that are interested in any wild, we manage and look at the woody browse.
And most of those are annuals. Most of the
forbs. Well, yeah, there's some perennial ones too. But yeah, most of what we call, wildflowers are annual wildflowers.
They don't have a root system to handle, like you said, to handle a drought.
Yeah, and even I'm sure there are some perennial and even biannual forbs that they utilize. But most of them that we're talking about are annual forbs. They set seed, germinate, grow in 1 year, set seed again, and then die.
And, I guess this is a question to ask now that I just thought about. But if you're going to plant a fall food plot, what in this area is the best thing to put in that fall food plot?
Depends on your soils. Depends on your soil types.
Black dirt?
Black dirt? I'll tell you, man.
Definitely not alfalfa.
Yeah.
That's the reason that most of these things have alfalfa in it, or have soy. Well, soybeans wouldn't be a cool season one, but and it just doesn't do good in the black dirt where I live.
Bang for your buck, I tell you. Wheat and oats is always a good go-to. I mean, deer use the daylights out of it. It's cheap and it works.
Oh, and easy to plant.
Easy to
find. You can buy that anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, and it works. But I tell you, I am really fond of a seed source. It's called Fall Deer Mix by Turner Seed, and it's got 20-something different species. And I planted in blackland and in the sandy land because something does well. It has all kinds of clovers and vetches and triticale and cereal rye. And if you're going to plant a food plot, I try not to plant annual rye because it can spread, but definitely plant cereal rye or something like that. But I like that mix. It's cheap to plant.
And it covers all soil types.
Everything, soil types. So I'm not saying it like when I plant it, Yeah, turnips come up over there in sand, like where I live now. They don't get very big, but I planted in the blackland and they do really well. And it's been in my spot, from noticing those turnips, if hogs don't get them, the deer really start hitting them late season. They seem to really hit them, whereas they're getting all those vetches and all those beans. Like, I forget what's all in there, but
So it's a lot of different things.
yeah, variety, and that's where we go back to diversity. Variety is everything. So,
And the plus is a lot of that stuff is good for the soils.
Yes, yeah, a lot of them.
A lot of legumes.
Yes, yeah.
Legumes, they fix nitrogen to the soil and increase the nutrients for the spring or whatever follows it.
And I mean, that's another thing while we're talking food. Wait, this is habitat management. Probably another topic. Really important. If your wildlife is a big interest in you, and also cows too. I mean, kind of work hand in hand together. You can reseed Bermuda grass fields in the winter right now. In the fall, no-till drill in some clovers, or something like that into those fields, and that'll give your wildlife something to eat as well as your cows, during those years.
And burr clover, usually comes back pretty good around here on its own.
Yeah, burr does for sure.
And man, I hate in the springtime when it comes time to spray weeds. You're like, God, I don't want to spray the weeds just yet because it's going to kill the clover, But it still seems to come back year after year after year.
Yeah, it really does. It's got an incredible seed source. It's a hardy stuff. I don't know. I mean, I've never planted burr clover. I mean, it's whatever, but
it just comes up.
Yeah,
it just everywhere.
comes up. Like those food plots I was saying, there's a lot of different species of clover, that are very good for deer.
Yeah, you can find clover just about anywhere, even in your dog's hair.
Yeah.
Clover, those little birds, they will stick to anything.
They will. That's how they spread in your yard if you got dogs.
I bet whoever invented Velcro did it based off of the bird.
They had to.
It is just like Velcro, man. It sticks to or a cocklebur. Yeah,
look at those under a microscope. It is cool.
I bet so. I bet some poor guy was pulling a cocklebur out of his sock one day. I was like, man, I should make a fastener like this, and we're gonna call it Velcro. Yes. And so let's see here, Chancey.
So, I mean, that pretty much covers them.
Well, hold on, it don't.
Well, yeah.
We forgot about something that's going to lead us right into the next part of this. Succulents.
Succulents. Oh, yes. Good point. Especially, and a lot of managers now, they are kind of starting, or a lot of them do. They're considering a fifth category of food, and they call these succulents. And these are things like cactus. Prickly pear cactus is what they call. Because you can't really think of them as a woody plant, or I don't think of them as a woody plant.
I don't either.
In South Texas, they are very, very important to white-tailed deer. I mean, I remember when I worked for a state, we would shoot deer in the summertime, to study them or look at their fetuses, and a lot of them still had lots of prickly pear pads in their rumen, even in wet years. So we know what they use it for a water source too. Prickly pear is important for water source.
Yes, which is going to be our next limiting factor we're going to talk about. But so it kind of falls as a food and a water source.
Sure, prickly pear, absolutely.
If you've ever chopped prickly pear cactus, that thing is full of water.
Oh yeah, they can withstand some serious conditions. When you see a prickly pear cactus start getting shriveled, it's dry.
It's dry at that point. Yeah. And so it amazes me that a deer could just chomp on a prickly pear cactus like it's nothing. I mean,
thorns are no obstacle for a deer. It's unbelievable. I've watched those things, and even like you get stuck by a cactus. The long ones are the easy ones to get out. The long spines. And like actually, we call them thorns on cactus, but they're not really thorns. They're actually modified leaves. The spines.
I had no idea that was a modified leaf.
Yes.
All thorns are modified leaves, or just on a cactus?
A thorn is actually a modified branch, but on a cactus, like the true terminology, the botany of it. It's a spine, and a spine is a modified leaf.
Well, how about that?
Whereas a thorn is a modified branch.
Well, how about that?
Cactus has spines. But to get back to the really bad ones, I think their names are Glockids, or I can't remember, Glockids or something. They're like the little bitty sharp ones that you get in. They're so hard you got to have tweezers to get out.
I think we call them Christmas tree cactus. Is that what you're talking about?
No, like if you look, there's two different kinds of spines on a cat prickly.
Oh, you're talking about the little
long ones that. But then the little tiny ones.
They're like bunched up a little bit.
Yes, those are hard ones to get out.
Man.
But I've seen them just jam-packed full in deer's gums.
It's nothing. Like it's nothing.
And they, they're healthy as all get out. And then their feet, their legs, their legs, you skint deer. Their legs is just bone, skin and bone right there. You grab a deer by the lower leg, below the knee, all bone, but it'll just be solid thorns. And they're tough, man. Like I said, every now and then they can get an impacted jaw, which is nasty. It's like you get a hole in your cheek and food gets back there. But for the most part, No, thorns are no problem. I mean, when you think about why deer is the way it is, a concentrate selector, it has everything to do with their biology. Their rumen makes them pick certain things, but also they're adapted to walk from plant to plant and pick the very best parts. They're trying to pick those apical meristems, the best part of that plant that's growing, the growing part of the plant, because it has the most nutrition.
Yes, and so back to the rumen thing again. I don't know exactly how many gallons that a rumen is in a deer, but I want to say in cattle it's somewhere around 40 gallons or something like that. So inside these rumens is a lot of these living organisms called ruminant microbes.
Sure, yeah.
And is what their whole purpose is. Well, not whole purpose, but one of their purposes is to break down the lignins and cellulose in the grass. So that's why we as humans can't go outside at lunchtime and graze on the grass outside, which would be handy if we could.
Sure could.
Yes, it would be handy.
The sun's energy.
Oh, man, I mean, yeah. And so in 1 milliliter of fluid from the rumen of a cow, there's more microbes than there are people on the face of the earth. So take that into consideration. One milliliter.
That's a cc.
That's 1 cc. Yeah. Yes, if you're familiar with taking shots or any of that stuff, a milliliter is basically almost a little bit more than a drop.
Yeah.
It's basically all it is. And you're talking, there's that many little living organisms. You're talking in a cow 30, 40 gallons. I don't remember. It's been so long since I've heard that.
I had a professor, Dr. Weckerly, that did tons of work on deer rumens, and deer rumen capacity. I don't know what it is on a white-tailed deer either. I should know that question, but I don't know it off the top of my head. But I'll find out.
If I could figure out a way how to...
I've gone through a lot of them. I wouldn't say they'd hold more than a gallon or two, I mean...
Well,
there's lots of papillae in there, like little fingers that help absorb, and that's one of the reasons. The speed, and also I've read somewhere that deer, they have the microorganisms to break down cellulose and lignin, but not as much and not as diverse as a cow, and so they're not as efficient. That's why they can eat some grass, but once it gets like cell walls, back to biology, cell walls. Plants have cell walls. Animals don't. They have cell membranes. Well, those cell walls is where that cellulose gets and that lignin gets. As that grass matures and gets harder, deer just can't utilize it, whereas like a cow can.
Right, and so kind of like cows, though, deer will regurgitate and chew the grass a second, or chew whatever they've been eating a second time. The thing about it is that with the deer, it passes through so fast that like they can't benefit from things like Bermuda grass.
Yeah, a deer will starve to death on a belly full of grass,
just like a goat. Goats and deer, they'll starve to death on a Bermuda grass pasture. They've got to have all these other things that we talked about.
Yes, I mean a well manicured, as much as we like to look at them, a well manicured hayfield that's got a scattered post oak here and there's been herbaceous or been sprayed for weeds and everything, just looks like a golf course. It might as well be a biological desert for just about any animal.
Really and truly,
white-tailed deer, it might as well be. I mean, it's not even good for birds. The seeds that it does make, if it does make seeds, are so tiny, even quail and sparrows, hardly anything can utilize it. And then if it's mature, deer can't really eat it. There's not a lot of diversity of insects in those places because diversity of insects, diversity of animals comes from diversity of plants. Like I said, it always comes back to habitat.
Absolutely.
The more diverse plants have, the more niches you got. When we talk about niche, let's just mention it right quick. A niche is basically where an animal fits into its environment. What is the animal's role? Good definition is a niche is the animal's job and address. Some people have considered
it's its purpose in life.
Its purpose in life, basically. Its job and address. What does it do? What is its role in the ecosystem? You got decomposers. They're like the perfect example of a good niche and is beaver. They consider a beaver a keystone species because by the very nature of its habits, it produces habitat for other animals. Just by the nature of a beaver being
there's basically other animals that can't exist if the beaver didn't exist.
Yeah, or they may have could, but the beaver provides habitat in abundance for them. Think of your wood ducks, think of your ponds, think of your otters, think of everything else that goes with it. And in some instances, today, white-tailed deer are considered a keystone species, especially in woodland areas. And they are because they get so abundant, and so many of them, by them doing what they do, browsing the best parts of those plants. If you're taking the energy growing part of that plant off every day by eating it, not every day, but when it puts on, bite it off again because of too many deer, it'll eventually kill that plant. In the east, in places where deer numbers are too abundant, they're changing the composition of the forest. So basically, the deer are targeting the better food species, which are your hardwoods, like your oaks and your hickories and your good food. And a lot of the other plants that they don't like as much, the deer are targeting the good ones and they're letting the bad ones grow. And so
Oh
it's
no.
changing the plant communities of those forests. And so some forest biologists over there in the East consider them a keystone species as well.
And once again, we're not going to talk about this a whole lot, but that's where supplemental feeding is kind of a bad thing.
Well, yeah, if carrying capacity, yeah.
You're increasing your carrying capacity on the feed that is now overloading your habitat.
Yeah, well, because I'm for supplemental feeding, specifically if it's within your goals and within your budget, and you want to manage.
Well, me too, because I own a feed store, Chance.
Yeah,
I'm all about supplemental feeding, buddy. Yeah,
and I am too, and it works. I believe, but we need to think of supplemental feeding like this. It is exactly what it says. It is a supplement to a healthy, quality habitat. Think of yourself if you were an exercise fitness person, and you were taking supplements. But if you were eating junk food all day and wasn't getting rest and wasn't drinking plenty of water and just living in a bad habitat, basically you're staying in the bars too much or something and not getting good quality food.
That's no good, Chance.
You could take You could take all the supplements you want. That's not really helping you. It's a supplement to a quality diet. And that's what we need to look at. And where do deer get their diet? They get it from the habitat.
Yes, and just to be clear, me and Chancey do not suggest anybody stay in a bar too long.
No.
We would never do that, and we would never do that. We don't expect you to do that either. So, Chancey, we got to move on, brother. Else we'll be here 2 hours again.
Water, right?
Water, because we talked about the cactuses being a water source.
Might as well go to water and then hit cover after water.
Yeah, water's not a problem where we are.
No, it's not a problem where we are. We're pretty lucky. Even in drought years, here it's a water for pastures and everything else. But for the most part with deer, it's not a problem for us, surface water. And deer need surface water. I've watched them too many times. They truly need surface water. And when you think about water is the most critical nutrient for not only deer, but for all wildlife, even us.
Yes,
we can't live without it. They need surface water and freestanding water. And they can extract water from plant material. They can
cactus.
Like cactus.
Or lush grass.
Really lush grass, like good oak green crop, they can get stuff from that. They get some water from metabolism. This is basically breaking down carbohydrates.
Yes, that is a byproduct.
They call it metabolic water. They can get some like that, but most of it, they need freestanding water, especially lactating mamas. Those, when she's producing milk and she's raising baby, needs a water. Most of the time, I recommend during your fawning, because we need to feed, like we talked about before, we need to take care of mama first. Mama and baby first, then worry about antlers. I always recommend putting a supplemental feeding station near a water source. Consumption goes up. It also helps those mamas. They don't have to travel as far, everything. Just something to think about on the.
And that's kind of the same way with cattle too. Like a lot of times people are like, hey, your cattle are eating too much mineral, this, that, and the other. Well, if you put your mineral feeder farther from water, they're going to eat less mineral because it's so far away from there. It's amazing how much water controls what everything does.
Oh, yeah. Well, they need it to metabolize and everything.
Sure.
It's like the most critical nutrient we need. You can survive a long time without food. You can't go very long without water.
I don't know if this time I mentioned this or not, because I should have mentioned it back with the food, but a lot of that's dependent on the soil types and all that stuff, too.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Soils are critical.
Like, for instance, I noticed that cattle in the black dirt, probably deer the same way in the black dirt, will gain a whole lot better off of the grass due to there being more minerals in the heavier clay soil.
Actually, the soil types and fertile soils, good soils grow good quality diverse plants that are very nutritious and very sought after by deer. So like, I don't know if as a general rule in our neck of the woods, you could probably get by easily. A good carrying capacity. Bottomland habitat can hold, a deer to 10 acres easy. Probably a deer to 6 to 8 on really good quality bottomland hardwood. You can carry around a lot of deer. Whereas you get up in the post oak, sandy, high and dry stuff where it's just post oak and yopon, up on some type of an old dry hill that's just broomweed. You might be looking at a deer to 25 acres. Because
food becomes a limiting factor.
The food becomes a limiting factor. And also the quality of that food, in those less fertile soils.
And exactly. We'll talk a lot more about that later.
Yeah, when we
in another episode of nutrition. Moving back to water.
Yep.
So we have plenty of water here.
Yeah.
You go south of here, not so much.
Yeah, and in a lot of those places down in South Texas, they know how important water is in West Texas. But when you're thinking about a white-tailed deer, a good rule of thumb is you need at least a water source every 500 acres for sure, preferably much, much closer. The less that animal has to travel to meet its needs, the better, in my opinion. Now, granted, there's places in South Texas that have so big. In West Texas, it's not even feasible to put one out that much, but that many. But, that's a good rule of thumb, for most landowners
And
out there.
that's probably why in West Texas there aren't many white-tailed deer.
Yeah, it's the brush is starting to creech that way. But yeah, there's not. It's mule deer habitat out there. Yeah.
I heard somewhere that they're following the mesquite. That mesquite
The
are starting to
brush.
grow farther and farther northwest. And the deer are starting to travel that way following.
I can see that.
The white-tailed deer.
Yeah, the white-tailed. I mean, I've known for years, that overlap, and there's some hybridization that can happen. But now I've heard it's getting worse. I don't know much about mule deer. Unfortunately, they're a fascinating critter. I wish I knew more about.
Well, we didn't grow up with them.
No, we didn't. But I've heard that brush is encroaching westward big time. Mule deer, you think about it, there's brushy draws out there, but they're more of an open species. When they avoid predators, they're prodding. They ain't running through brush. Whereas whitetail, they're more of a brush species. So as that brush encroaches out west, I can see white-tailed deer following them, and that would be a problem for mule deer.
Yes, it would. Yeah, and so I guess moving back to South Texas down there, water troughs are a big deal.
Water troughs are a huge deal, critical and super. I used to video around water sources in 2011, just because it was so much fun.
For those of you who don't know, we had a terrible drought.
Oh, yeah.
That was probably our last major drought, I would say.
Yeah, but the one that was, we're still seeing effects from 2011 drought, I think.
Well, here's what's kind of scary, Chancey. How many more people do we have in Texas now than we had in 2011?
I don't know, but they're coming in by the millions.
Yes.
It feels like it.
What percent of our population has moved here in the last 5 years?
I read that recently.
Is it like 15%?
I don't know. I just know there's lots and lots of people coming in. It really makes, I have to scratch my head because I remember 20 years ago, Governor Perry was talking about, man, water's a huge issue. We sure got some water problems in Texas. And now it's, open the doors, everybody come on in, and nobody's saying a peep about water.
Not yet. Yeah. You don't miss it till it's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and droughts come around again.
Yeah, I think we're in the verge of seeing some water wars in Texas.
I think we are too,
in Central Texas, in our neck of the woods. Those water wars are coming.
And that should probably be another podcast.
Yes. But back to water troughs in South Texas. The best thing to do with water troughs, like if you got windmills down there, let it run over, man. Let that freestanding water is best.
Well, I think here'd be the time to point out too that water trough height is important.
Very high, especially for your fawns and your young yearling deer.
So many people forget, like even when people around here supplemental feed deer, you forget how important it is to feed the little deer.
Yes.
The little fawns,
the little ones, they need water too.
They need water too.
Yeah, so a good, 18-inch trough. And if you can't or don't have good troughs, get some dirt or some rocks, or make a little berm up there next trough. Seen that done? If you've all got tall water troughs. Also, think about the meso mammals and the small stuff that can fall in there in your water trough. So all it takes is get a cedar post and put in there. Put a cedar post in that water, and that way if a squirrel falls in there swimming around, it can hop on that post and hop out of that water.
It's basically like a pool ladder.
Yeah.
It's just like a ladder for us to get out of the pool. You put a rock. We raise chickens, and when you have little chicks, if you don't put rocks or something in a big water source, they'll jump in there and drown pretty easily. Mm-hmm. And the same thing happens with these water troughs, I guess.
No, so I just find that water troughs are really, really important for wildlife, especially in dry years. Just got to think. You don't think how water important that is if you've ever had bird baths and, have a bird bath in your backyard when it gets dry. There may be a creek, nearby or water, but you can fill it and put fresh water in there, or particularly if it's running, man, it's just like a magnet to birds coming in, Have a little bit of fresh water that's not stagnant and running. You'll bring birds in, just wouldn't believe. It's so important. It's one of those things that, unfortunately, I think gets overlooked sometimes, even though it's probably the most important.
and back to sometimes maybe letting it overflow.
Yeah, overflow. That way all your little critters and your little mammals and your little reptiles. I mean, reptiles will utilize water as well.
And
Quail
it'll
use
start a
water.
whole new ecosystem.
Yes, you
It
make
like
a little wetland.
yeah.
And I've seen in some of those little wetland oases in South Texas just dragonflies like you wouldn't believe. All different kinds of species of dragonflies. I don't know what they were, but I like nature enough. I noticed the differences in all of them. They were just beautiful, different kinds of dragonflies. So you can get all that stuff just by keeping a water source or a water feature, on your landscape. I know it's not really related to deer, but just having a water feature in your yard, or away from your place and kind of landscape with some native plants, you'd be surprised at the critters that you'll bring in and how much fun you'll have looking at them.
And they'll really appreciate it.
Yes, they will.
Yes.
Absolutely, they will.
So water and food, two main sources of life right there.
Yes.
But we're not done yet.
No, we got 2 more to cover.
And
hey, what is it? Cover. We need to cover.
Hey, we need to cover.
Let's cover.
Yeah, so cover is important because everything needs to hide.
Yes, I mean, well, most wildlife species require specific types of cover and shelter. And what do they use it for? Well, it's living space to feed and rest. Wildlife will use it to escape from predators and in bad weather. I mean, think about how bad it was last February.
Oh, and that really cold from
yeah, a lot of little grassland songbirds took it in shorts, man. It was a bad deal for them.
Central Texas, we saw the coldest weather we've probably ever seen.
For sure.
I'm pretty sure that's documented. Yes, yeah. Yes. And so cover was very important at that time.
Cover is important. They need cover, thermal cover to go get in there and break. Thank God we didn't get bad wind, but still, just as insulation, you get enough cover. It's like insulation. Just like grass for grassland songbirds or other species, insects overwintering.
Or even earlier, Chancey mentioned when me and him were talking that a cedar tree is an important cover in the wintertime for different birds and stuff because they've still got their leaves. The birds have a good place to hide. To stay warm.
Eastern red cedar, like in my neck of the woods, I see in the hill country there's ash junipers. There's too much of it. It's affecting their water resources and their aquifer.
Oh, have you ever dug up a cedar tree? Those things have got a root system on them now.
Oh, yeah, like a mesquite. Yeah, mesquite.
But more fibrous root type. Really? I mean, roots shallow to the ground. I mean, really competing with everything. That's why there's no grass. No grass growing under cedar tree.
Not in them cedar breaks. Yeah, and then also the leaves fall and just kind of breaks it. But from a cover standpoint, especially for birds, I'll go and selectively manage and cut down cedar trees, but I try to leave the ones that don't bother me too much or the ones that are kind of tucked away. And then because at nighttime you start paying attention and watching your birds going to roost, so many of them are going into those cedar trees. They just roost in there and also protects them from rain because, it insulates a lot of water and rainfall as well. And it's a good wind block. So those little birds you think about, they're kind of going into a state of torpor when it gets real cold at night. But, man, they have a little small animal trying to stay warm in a very cold night. So that cover is important.
Yes. And so that's a good one for birds. Yep. But what about for deer?
Usually your bottomlands, or even thicker brush areas, and I've seen deer laying down out in the middle of a field just with their heads down and everything. But they need cover for escape from predators as well. So they need, it's hard to really think of thermal cover in Texas, because in our area, other than last year, it really doesn't get that cold in Texas.
Right. That was rare.
Up north, there actually is things called deer yards where it's blocks of timber, most of them like conifers, that the deer will travel. They kind of like migrate. I hate to say migrate, but they'll travel a long ways to get to those deer yards. And it's specifically for a thermal cover to help break them from those cold north winds, and those bad things. But down here in Texas, cover is really important for deer for escape cover from predators. Most of the time you just don't see deer mostly more than a quarter of a mile away from some type of brush or some type of woodland edge or some type of edge effect. They'll travel over a quarter in between covers from cover. Most of the time when they're out there feeding, you just don't usually see them too very far. I remember we did some studies on putting feeders out, how far from the edge can you get away to deer still utilize it. And I think the sweet spot was, around 100, 120 yards. After you start getting much further than that, the deer use just kind of goes down. Not that they won't use it. It's just the use kind of goes
They get a little nervous out there.
It's a little bit because think about it. They did have to run away. They got longer to go.
Yes.
They got further to go to reach safety. So cover's super important from that aspect for white-tailed deer around here in Texas, but it's mainly even more important for like the babies, the little fawns. fawning cover is absolutely critical for fawns.
Me and Chancey used to hog hunt on a place that had a power line clearing going through it,
Yeah,
and that was probably an ideal place for the deer to be. It was a clearing pretty wide.
yeah, edge.
It was about 70, 80, 100 yards wide, and brush on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd go down there in the evening. Now, the hogs would never hardly be out there too much when we would go, but there would be deer grazing out in that grass, and they'd spook and run right back to the woods.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It was ideal.
The utility line company kind of maintains it or shreds
They do
it,
maintain it. They keep all the brush out. That's perfect.
Yeah, but then the brush that gets cut, it comes back with new growth. And
it
new
does.
Brushes, and those deer in there eating that young growth and all that stuff coming back. And then they got woody cover that they can run right into real fast. So, yeah, that's what we talked about. It increases more edge forming deer edge species.
That increases a lot of edge.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so
that's why in South Texas, they cut senderos through places.
For that reason right there. That's a perfect example of that.
To see, and then it also attracts,
Mm-hmm. And so that kind of, that covers cover, I guess.
Yeah, that basics are covered. So we got one more.
What are we left with, Chancey?
Space.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think.
Cover, water, and space.
So when we talk about space, I guess depending on where you're at.
Yeah, and depending on your quality of habitat, it kind of goes back to carrying capacity. And so I know we're talking about deer, but most wildlife don't like to be crowded. And so space always refers to the arrangements of food, water, and shelter. The interspersion, how they are. The better quality, the more that you have of that.
The less food you have, the more space they need.
Yeah, the less competition you get, So competition for resources is a big thing. So all wildlife need a certain amount of space. And they need space requirements are often called home ranges. And although home ranges for whitetail deer can overlap, and even for other species, each animal occupies its own particular unique space. For whitetail deer, you think about, I get people ask, well, how much acres do you need, or how whatever, just to give you some general rules of thumb, some stuff that's come out of Dr. Fulbright stuff, and some Dr. Damaris's, they were looking at home range of whitetail deer in general. And it varies because of habitat. You can't really put a number on it. It's one of those things that truly depends. But in general, for a doe in Texas, between 200 and 350 acres, something like that.
250 to 300?
Yeah, 200 for like a home range of a doe, which is basically most of the area she occupies in her life. Not to say they can't travel further. Some home range estimates could be as little as 100, but I've seen some home ranges were 1,500, depending on the amount of food.
And a buck needs even more than that.
Yeah, the bucks are generally double what a doe is, depending on the habitat. So, it's hard to say what's the home range of a white-tailed deer. Well, it depends. And I know wildlife biologists are notorious for saying it depends.
Sure.
But the truth is, it really does depend.
Yeah,
it depends on those 4 limiting factors, plus the other limiting factors. Predation. Most time predation is not a problem for white-tailed deer in Texas if you've got cover requirements. But if you got degraded land and your place is overgrazed and you don't have any fawning cover, predation can be a big deal for white-tailed deer.
Like in wild hogs.
Yeah, absolutely. Coyotes mainly. Coyotes and wildcats can see them better. So when when she lays her babies, twins are the rule. Every now and then she'll have triplets, but it's rare, but it happens. The twins are the rule after they get about 2 years old. When she puts them out there, she places them in different spots, and that little baby fawn has the ability to, number one, they're born with no scent, which is amazing. And they have the ability to lay absolutely 100% still, not move a muscle. They can lay absolutely still. And they never lose that ability. Even bucks, I've seen bucks that are like really fair or fit, whatever, they still have, as a mature deer, can go back to that, lay down, lie absolutely motionless. But little fawns, they do that for the first, few days, weeks of their life. And then they'll start up and going with mama a little more. But in those first few days, week or so, when she's never more than 100 yards away. And most of the time, she puts those little babies in fawning cover, which is kind of tall, mid-thigh, high grass,
Yes.
And then usually scattered trees. So you got some shade and some thermal cover in there to help regulate. And that's what they try selecting. And they're still going to have babies if there's no fawning cover. So if there's no fawning cover, they got to put them somewhere. And then that's where predation can really go up on fawns.
Well,
because those first 3 days, that baby ain't going to run, and coyotes can just.
And so to tell this story, speaking of that, about them laying these fawns in this grass, for cover, I guess you would say. I remember several years ago, we had a hayfield down in a creek bottom, which was, kind of near water, perfect habitat for deer. And we missed the whole first cutting because it was too wet to cut it. So the ryegrass died, the blue stem and Johnson grass all came back. It got really tall, really thick. And I'll never forget cutting that hayfield. I literally never felt so bad in my life. You would make a round around that field, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden you'd run right over a little fawn because you could get right up on them. I mean, you could have
Yeah.
that tractor run as loud as you wanted
They
to, make
won't
all
move.
the noise.
No.
They just laid there, and you ran them right over with that hay cutter.
And
So
during
it
their
was,
first few days, they will not move. They
yes.
rely on absolute stillness and camouflage and lack of no scent.
And I don't want to get too far ahead here. This is another topic too, but Jancy said that a doe doesn't lay twins in the same place. She'll lay them in two different places, and in that case, where they were all scattered through this hayfield that you could not see. I mean, going as slow as you could possibly go. I mean, hollering, making whatever noise you wanted to.
Yeah.
They would not. I mean, not even like move an ear. I mean, just lay there.
Yeah, that would have been probably late May or June.
It was. That was exactly when it was. Yeah. I'll never forget that
When they're
deer.
little bitty, they just they won't, so like when you're cutting hay, all of us has run into that situation. But if you see a fawn like that, just knowing it's little bitty, it's not running, it's not abandoned, it's not hurt. Mama is always within 100 yards, so just let it be. It's fine because a lot of places, and when they don't have cover, or if there's a lot of competition, there's certain areas of the county where they might have food, they might have cover, but they don't have fawning cover. And certain particular areas have good fawning cover. It might be 40 or 50 acres and it's fawning cover. Well, does will travel to those fawning covers just to have their baby. There's more, and where there's, especially on drought years, if there's not just cover everywhere, fawning cover. Sometimes if there's not much cover, it's strange, but deer, if you're in an urban environment, or even if you're around the house or something and live way out in the country, kind of like I do, it seems like they'll put that fawn by something. They'll put it by a tree. Or one time I had a doe that she kept her little fawn by my wellhouse. I don't know why, but
that was what she chose.
She chose to put it by that wellhouse. And it's funny because in urban environments where there's no fawning cover really, those does will put them by like a brick wall, something like that. It's funny, or by like a little landscape plant. They pick and choose their spots.
Well, and like you talked about earlier, the deer won't get very far from cover. And so when you're talking about space, if I've got 1,200 acres of a big row crop field, it's going to take a lot of acres in order to maintain a deer population. Because there's no cover, because there's no water. So these four limiting factors, I guess, all of the other things kind of go into how much space they need.
Yeah.
If they've got all of these other things in one small area right there, that's probably all they need.
Yeah, they do if it's enough.
Yes.
So, like with that said here, when you look at Milam County and habitat fragmentation, this is why these limiting factors are so important, and space requirements is so vitally important, because there's one population of deer in this, say, 1,500 acres. A lot of the research says you need around 1,500 to 2,000 acres to adequately, manage a population of deer. And same thing for turkeys and quail, too, to manage on a population level. Because if you got a bunch of 40-acre tracts and 50-acre tracts and 100-acre tract or 300-acre tract all combined to make that 1,500 acres, well, some tracts only provide cover. Some tracts only provide fawning cover. Some tracts may not provide anything because it's Bermuda grass field, may just, provide some little legume feeding, at certain times of the year.
Sure.
Those deer are utilizing all those limiting factors.
And that's when it's important for people to talk to each other.
Yes. Talk to your neighbor. Start wildlife management associations, because like the turkeys that you see on your property, that's eating on your property, well, they're going to go over to the neighbors and maybe roost. He might have the roost.
Absolutely.
You got the food source, or you got the brooding area.
And somebody else has the water.
Especially in these landscapes. So, the small guys, if we can try to manage to do everything, and have that, it kind of will help,
and look at what your neighbors have. Okay, he's got the water, he's got the cover.
Mm-hmm.
I've got the food sources, I guess you would say.
Like baby food plot or something. So, and that's the kind of thing with deer and quail and all that stuff. Generally you can get food pretty easily. Like if you plant food plots, you can get that in one growing season.
Absolutely.
You plant summer and winter food plots. You can even plant established native grasses, for fawn and cover and let the brush. You can generally get that in, 3 to 5 years.
The cover and the water
is a different issue, unless you put supplemental water out, but you can do guzzlers or dig a tank, or
sure
do something like that. Put some type of water source out there. You're out and just you got 1,000 acres of coastal Bermuda or 1,000 acres of just open and scattered trees with none of those cover types. It's hard to hold a good population of deer. I'm not saying they're not going to come through your place or utilize it in some way.
Absolutely.
It's mostly what you have is open space with no cover. There's certain things we need to address. Try to plant some cover, plant some rose. There's lots of things you could do, but it just takes time, especially when we're talking about woody cover.
Yes, and with the places getting smaller and smaller, coordination amongst people is also becoming more and more important too.
Yes, we need to talk with our neighbors, man.
Yeah.
Get good communication, good relationships with our neighbors. Definitely look into wildlife, man. If you're interested in wildlife, and I'm guessing you are if you're listening to this, then think about it. If you're a landowner, think about wildlife management. Association.
But the government will even give you money for it. You can get a wildlife exemption now.
Break. Yes, you get a wildlife tax break, and you can still run cattle on your property, but the primary goal is no longer livestock production, it's wildlife production. And you can manage anything from a white-tailed deer, given if you have enough acreage to realistically kind of manage for a white-tailed population. Yes. But everybody has enough acres. It don't matter how much acres, but everybody's got enough acres to manage for lightning bug. Or, grassland songbirds. Grassland songbirds are just getting hit so hard right now. And like all of our little sparrows and winter sparrows right now, right now there's so much stuff we can be doing on our small properties right now, which make all the difference in the world for so many different species.
I guess that kind of wraps up habitat.
Well, that brushes
the top of all those different things, I guess you would say.
An hour on each one of those things, Brad. Food, cover, water, and space.
And hey, Chancey, in the future we probably will.
Okay, yeah.
But today we here. Hey, so guess how long we plan on talking about that for? 30 minutes.
That was supposed to be 30 minutes.
Well, guess how long it's been, Chancey? 1 hour.
1 hour.
But we cannot leave here today without talking about this. So Brad and Chancey only have 3 episodes now.
Yeah.
And it just so happens the 3rd episode falls on the week of Christmas.
'Tis the season.
So we can't leave here today without talking about
something cool.
Something Christmas-wise.
Something kids are like.
Something Christmassy, wildlifey, which I guess we have to talk about reindeer.
Reindeer and caribou. Absolutely.
Caribou.
Yeah, same thing.
And so,
we call them caribou in North America. They call them reindeer in Eurasia.
And here's probably the reason for that. I'm sure some guy came up with the song, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Caribou. And then they're like, well, that don't sound right.
That doesn't really got a job.
We got this dang caribou with these reins on it. Yeah. Let's call it a reindeer.
No.
I don't know where we need to probably look into that as to where that came from. But the
Santa's Elves made that song up, didn't they?
Sure. So that's who coined the term the reindeer.
And I guess technically North Pole is not North America. It's not really Eurasia, is it? It's the North Pole.
It is what it is, Chancey. Yeah. This ain't a geography lesson, Chancey. We're not here to talk about earth science, buddy. We're here to talk about wildlife today, and more importantly, reindeer.
Reindeer.
You hear the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And it's kind of cool because apparently a reindeer has a very unique nose in a way.
They do, Brad. They do. They have like what's called, a counter current exchange system going on in their nose, and it helps them to, regulate their temperature so they don't lose so much heat.
Because believe it or not, they exist in really cold places.
Yes, really cold. If you think of reindeer, they're up Alaska and in the Yukon or way north. Places I haven't spent much time about. So I don't know a whole lot about caribou other than they are fascinating, well-adapted critters. They're just amazing to read about.
So their nose would get pretty dadgum cold up there.
Mm-hmm.
And their body temperature would get cold as well. But they've got this heat exchange that happens inside their nose. Yeah. They've got like 30% like blood vessels inside their nose than what other deer do. Flow of blood in the direction that it flows, it keeps the blood going back to their heart warmer.
Yeah, so basically like a counter current exchange, what's going on is you got arteries taking blood from the arteries, which is warm. It just came from the heart. Yeah, take it from the heart, which is warm, and you're going to the extremities, so your nose or your legs or something like that, and the arteries going down to the extremities get blood to it, so it doesn't die. But then the veins take the blood back to the heart.
Correct.
And these veins and these, it's like a 2-lane highway. Think of it that way. These arteries and veins lay side by side one another, and there's some that's why they call it a counter exchange. There's some heat exchange going on there. So it's very efficient, as far as a heat loss and maintaining heat.
And keeps them warm.
Keeps them warmer. Same thing like birds do the same thing with their legs. The aquatic wetland birds that stand out in water in the wintertime, they have the same type system in their legs.
I've always wondered how they keep from freezing to death.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty amazing, actually.
Yes.
It really is. It's just the reindeer are adapted to a harsh environment. You think about it. And that's another thing that's really cool about them is they're one of the only deer species that's basically cursorial, like it's built for speed and running. Of course, pronghorn run all the time, but reindeer migrate like crazy, and they're runners, man. They are runners, and that's another thing that's neat about them is their babies, the little caribou babies, when they're born, they're what's called precocial. Precocial just means you can hit the ground running, kind of like a chicken. Think about it. When it hatches, not very long.
They don't lay around like a whitetail for a few days.
Yeah. No, a caribou can start a little fawn caribou or calf. I guess is what I call it, calf, not a fawn. They're up suckling within minutes, and they can be on the road within hours. Following mama, and they're going. Whereas whitetail deer, they're putting them here and there and stashing them. Like I said, they won't move at all. They rely on stealth, to try to avoid predators. Whereas little caribou, he's up and rolling, man, following mama in the herd. And
another neat, while we're talking about the adaptations, their hooves actually expand.
Yes, I heard
in the snow.
Yes, so like snowshoes.
Like snowshoes, yes. And once all that melts and goes away, they shrink back down and get smaller. So how cool is a reindeer?
Way cool, man.
I mean, it is.
But another thing that's cool about them, they're the only deer in North America. The cows, the females, have antlers.
That they do. I didn't even think about that.
That's really cool. And what's amazing about them is, we'll talk about.
It's probably mostly for protection.
Protection, but then also I've read some studies that they utilize it in the wintertime as a food source. Now, not as a food source, but to dig through the snow, help dig through the snow, so they'll paw, and then also use that because they have
to dig.
Think like that paddle that's on the front of a caribou. Some of them suggest they're moving snow out of it to help get, which is amazing because. The males have antlers too, and we know that the photoperiod works so much with the
hormones.
Yeah, with the hormones and the antlers, but the females drop at different times than the males.
That's odd.
That blows my mind, man.
Maybe because they need them a little longer to protect their babies.
Yeah, I think so. And environmental factors are, because I think I read somewhere that the cow caribou, they drop their antlers right after their babies are born, but
they do drop them.
Or maybe they start growing them. They start growing them right after.
Boy, that's odd. How cool is nature?
Yeah, I know it. So that's usually in the spring, but the males, they drop usually in the winter, like in fall, is what I read. So
very interesting.
To me, so that tells you, yes, photoperiod is 100% critical. But there's a lot of environmental factors, too, that take into play.
And one other cool thing about it is that they're one of the only deer that have been domesticated, I guess you would say. Yeah,
domesticated up in like Norway and.
I think you've been to petting zoos before, and they all have a reindeer. None of them really have a white-tailed buck deer.
No, No, they sure don't. But the nomadic people, like I don't know, I should know, but whatever over there in Eurasia, the nomadic people with the reindeer, they've domesticated them and they even milk them, and utilize their milk. They utilize everything, eat them, food.
Then why on earth, Chancey, do we leave milk out for Santa if he's got reindeer to milk? I mean,
well,
that's it.
All those reindeer are males.
Oh,
sure, Dancer. I don't think there's any cow.
Is Dancer a male? Maybe he is.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any cow reindeer or not. So
yes.
That's why he wants milk.
Maybe so. I'll keep leaving the milk out just in case. Yeah. We're probably so busy he ain't got time to milk the reindeer. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
I'm sure milking reindeer takes
He's got a lot of stops in one night.
He does. Yeah. It's like, God dang, I only had some reindeer milk right about now.
Yeah. I've never milked a reindeer, but I imagine the teats aren't quite as big as like a cow.
So that's a whole another episode, Chancey. Yeah. So reindeer milking, it's probably quite the sport. But so Chancey,
one more thing I want to cover before we leave caribou. Just want to say this. Only take a second. In 1921, Olaus Murie, who was an incredible wildlife biologist back in the day. He was studying, he's like, I think, the father of elk. He was a big elk biologist and deer biologist, but he was in Alaska trying to do a census on caribou. And
What year was this?
this was in 1921. So in
Holy
1921, I think he was in Alaska somewhere, probably around Mount McKinley. I'm not sure exactly where. I know he was up in that area in Alaska. And 20 days, one herd, it took 20 days to pass. And during those 20 days, the first 8 days, he counted 1,500 caribou passed each day.
1,500.
And then in the remaining 12 days, it came 100 came each day. And that was in 1921. And he estimated that population then to be 568,000 animals.
In one herd.
In one herd. It took 20 days to pass. Wow, man.
Now,
Wow.
Can you imagine in 1921
Yeah.
in the cold
Yeah.
counting 1,500
Yeah.
reindeer a day?
You know, he probably.
You know good well he miscounted and fell asleep.
Well, that's what he said too. He goes, "Hey, my estimate's fine." He goes, "It could have been closer to 1 million." You know,
Yeah.
because you know how hard it is just to count. You know, cattle with only a herd of cows when there's 30 and they're out there traveling and moving. You're trying to count.
I've tried to count cows before, like a herd of 25
Yeah.
of them, and you get to like 3, you're like,
Yeah.
was that 3 or was that 5?
And what's great about it, that's why you usually, if you have your buddy out there, you know, whoever feeding with you, you both count, or all three of you
that's
count.
right.
And you always get different numbers. I counted 19. I got 21.
What is this guy's name that did this?
Olaus Murie.
Murie?
Yeah, he and
You know, Murie, he probably had his buddy Steve over there with him. And he's like, Steve, I got 1,500. How many you get?
yeah.
I got 365.
Yeah. Somebody, host Steve was dropping the ball.
Hey, he wrote it down, and so it's probably right. We'll go with that.
Yeah, no, I believe it. When you look at today, you know, some of the documentaries on caribou when they fly over, especially with Planet Earth. Now, I don't know if y'all seen that documentary, Planet Earth. The technology so much they can put videos above those herds, and you really can't. And it's just amazing to look at. I mean, there's no other migration on Earth that takes place like that other than the wildebeest in Africa.
Yes.
You know, the bison used to do that as well. That was a magnificent ecosystem, but unfortunately, we don't have that anymore. But the caribou migration in itself, from the calving grounds and also seasonally, it's just a fascinating thing to learn about and even read about.
And I think I read that global warming or the changing of the temperatures is affecting their migration too.
Yes, I've read that too, and their calving grounds and everything.
I guess that kind of wraps up this episode, Chancey.
Yes, that does. So what?
This 30-minute episode we had planned for.
30-minute episode. It went to what, an hour and 10?
Yeah, exactly an hour and 10 right now, Chancey. But that's okay.
Yes, it is. That was fun talking to you, Brad. And man, it's fixing to be Christmas, so we wish each and every one of y'all very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Yes, absolutely. We may not actually, with all that going on in a week.
Yes, sir.
It's gonna be hard to find time to get that done, but again, we enjoyed it, and we're up to a lot of listeners already.
Oh, that's great.
Over 2 episodes.
Hey, didn't you say that there was a listener in Moscow or something?
Yes, Russia, Germany.
It might have been Vladimir Putin. Listen, I heard he liked to hunt and fish.
Well, and now we're giving a little information about reindeer.
Yeah, so, now, there you go, Mr. Putin. You can manage your reindeer herd.
Yeah, because I'm sure they knew none of that about reindeer.
Yeah, no. They're only in their backyard.
That was probably the first time hearing any of that. But anyways, guys, it was good talking to y'all again. We appreciate all your support, all the positive feedback we've gotten on Facebook, text messages, phone calls, and to all the people we don't know who are listening, we appreciate y'all too.
Absolutely.
And we look forward to doing this again for y'all as long as you keep listening. But this is Brad and Chancey signing off, I guess, until next time. So Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Goodbye, y'all. Merry Christmas.